Hey TechAdvisor fans, Adam here with the Mi 11i, one of a handful of Mi 11 versions out from Xiaomi. While it sports some very impressive hardware features all around, I wanted to specifically test out the camera. So in this video, I'm going to show off the results from a recent trip of one of my favorite nurseries in the Bay Area. Let's dig into the photos. Now, it's been a while since I've had my hands on a Xiaomi phone, so I was excited to try out this new release as their camera tech has been progressing rapidly. Looking at the specs, the Mi 11i packs a very large 108 megapixel main sensor inside its triple camera array, which is where I'll be focusing my efforts on. With all that in mind, let's look at some plants. The first thing I noticed after loading the photos into Lightroom was how dark some of the photos appeared. And by dark, I don't mean how bright it was out, it was full daylight. I mean that this camera system underexposed each photo I took under harsh light. Looking at the histogram, I noticed just how far to the left the tone is, meaning the photo turned out darker than I would have preferred. It's interesting because there is plenty of room to drop the shutter speed and give me a brighter exposure without blowing out the highlights. Out of all the photos I took there was only one example I could find of blown out highlights, and that was this indoor shot where HDR did not seem to fire. Now this is a tricky shot and most cameras would handle it this way, but it's outside that had me scratching my head. It's almost like the camera wanted to protect highlights like they were an endangered species, resulting in some darker captures than I expected. And while some of this can be adjusted by editing, because the exposure was off, I wasn't able to recover some of the darkest parts of these photos. Luckily, this is something that can be corrected with a patch, but it's a weird trait to look out for if you happen to have this phone. Now, it doesn't completely ruin all the photos I took, it just doesn't accurately represent how bright it was out that day, and I prefer a camera system that aims for accuracy. Moving on from exposure, let's check out how well the colors turned out in these shots. Here, I am happy to report that almost all these photos produced great results. I've seen other phones really struggle around so much green, but the Mi 11i handled itself like a champ. Not only is there plenty of variation between the greens that are represented, they turned out just as I remembered them. This is probably helped by the slightly warmer white balance, as it tends to favor greener tones while impacting redder ones. Looking at a couple red flowers shows just that. The reds are very saturated and almost represented as neon because they are so vibrant. Now this can be corrected by editing, so luckily it's not a huge deal. But knowing the limitations of each camera system is important to taking great photos. Now let's talk about the sharpness of these photos. Here we're going to be zooming in to check out how well they hold up. And while the sensor is 108 megapixels, it uses pixel binning in the default mode to capture a 12 megapixel result. When zooming in real close on some of these photos, we see that there is plenty of detail thanks to a combination of this large sensor and the bright environment. Even fine hairs on a cactus are represented with detail, and it holds up under scrutiny. I also didn't observe any telltale signs of post-processed over-sharpening or lens flaws. These things can show up as ghosting around high contrast edges or even purple fringing in extreme cases. And while even some of the best cameras exhibit these flaws around the edges of the frame where a lens is more susceptible to problems, I am very surprised by how well the Mi 11's main shooter holds up edge to edge. There is a bit of softening towards the corners, but that's it. I did have one photo misfocus here on these flowers, and I'm not sure why, but by and large these are some clean and sharp results in bright daylight. Color me impressed. How well that holds up in low light is another story, and one that I didn't test. You see, the main lens doesn't have an optical image stabilization system, which could potentially hurt it under worse conditions, but it wasn't a problem here. So while admittedly this was a pretty limited testing scenario, I'm generally happy with how the Mi 11i performed under these conditions. Even though the exposure decisions weren't fantastic with bright harsh light, I think it's something that can be addressed via a software update. But most of the time, the photos that I snapped had plenty of dynamic range, reproduced pleasing colors, and didn't exhibit any major problems. Xiaomi has definitely made some major improvements in the camera department since I last used one of their phones, and I'm excited to see how well their flagship devices perform against other companies. That's right, after taking some time off, my smartphone camera testing series, Last Cam Standing, will be returning this fall, and I'm ready to get back to it, as I'm sure all of you are. So that means you better subscribe and stay tuned for more camera comparisons here in the future on TechAdvisor.